Are you sick of making extremely slow progress on your tiny house journey? Finding the right resources and teaching online can be such a headache. That's why I've put together a free online tiny house summit that is coming up on November 4th through 6th. It features 30 sessions with famous tiny house experts like Dee Williams, Jay Schaefer, favorites like Macy Miller, and so many other names that I can't even list here. The summit is organized around 3 days of teaching. Day 1 is plan, day 2 is build, day 3 is live. Did I mention that it is free to attend November 4th through 6th? Head over to tinyhousesummit.co where you can register for access for the free summit. Again, that website is tinyhousesummit.co where you can register for free for the 2022 Tiny House Summit. I can't wait to share this with you. I've been working on it for months now, and it's truly the best free offering I've ever put together. All right, I'll see you in November. I can't wait to share the summit with you. That website again is tinyhousesummit.co.
What I'm talking about isn't people who are DIYers, and I want to encourage people who are DIYers to just be super creative and do what they want, and they're just building it for themselves. And they still need to follow the codes.
Welcome to the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast, the show where you learn how to plan, build, and live the tiny lifestyle. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and this is episode 236 with Jenifer Levini. And this conversation was actually recorded as a session for my upcoming Tiny House Summit, which, if you haven't heard of it, it's a free 3-day immersive tiny house learning event that's happening November 4th through 6th. You can register at tinyhousesummit.co. This conversation, while it was recorded as a summit presentation, I've decided that it's so important that I want as many people as possible to hear it. So that's why I'm also putting it out as a podcast interview. And so in this conversation, we're going to be talking about how to find a reputable and work with a reputable tiny house builder. Jenifer has an upcoming book called Tiny Home Buyer's Guide, and she goes in depth on what the actual codes and certifications mean and how you can apply them to looking at a new tiny house to determine whether that house was actually built to those standards. There are a lot of builders out there who are cutting corners and doing unscrupulous things. There are also great builders out there, but it is a buyer beware situation. So Jenifer is really going to walk us through it, and she's so generous with her knowledge and time. And after listening to this episode, you will have essentially a checklist of things to look for in a tiny house to make sure that it was built according to the standards. All right, I hope you stick around, and I will see you November 4th through 6th for the Tiny House Summit. All right, I am here with Jenifer Levini. Jenifer Levini is a housing and land use lawyer and author of 2 books about tiny home laws. Actually, 3. Building, Occupying, and Selling Tiny Homes Legally was the groundbreaking first book to help people wrap their arms around the complicated alphabet soup of laws that govern tiny homes in 2019. Since then, some places have relaxed their laws, making tiny homes legal. Others have strengthened their laws against tiny homes. The new book, Tiny Home Buyer's Guide, goes in depth on how to buy a tiny home on wheels that is built legally and safely. Jenifer Levini, welcome back.
Thank you, Ethan. Good to be here.
Yeah, and we've been talking every week, but it's great. So the last time we spoke, we both remarked on how that there had been some recent kind of high-profile news stories about tiny house builders scamming people out of money. And then you shared with me that you had heard of some situations where people actually were injured because of how tiny homes were built. And I think that was at that point that you said, we really need to get the word out, about this and educate people on how to look out for what are the red flags, how to work with a builder, and how to make sure that they're building your house to the legal standards that are required.
So true. I think that a lot of people in the tiny home industry spend a lot of time only talking about all the good stuff, sustainability, eco-friendly, less use of water and resources. And there's a lot of bad stuff that is going on in the industry. A lot of people are taking advantage of those who want to build, who want to live affordably. And, someone who doesn't have a lot of money for living doesn't have a lot of money to defend themselves when someone rips them off. And so they're super vulnerable. And unfortunately, because I'm a lawyer, when things go right, I never hear, no one calls me and says, oh, lucky day, I bought a tiny house. But whenever something goes wrong, I hear from the people because they say, I bought a tiny house and it caught on fire. Or what happens a really lot is that they say, I gave someone money to build a tiny house. I gave them my life savings, and then they never built me anything. And that money is just gone. The tiny house builder used it to live on and didn't, have enough money to buy the parts, and the money is just gone. So I hear a lot of those stories.
And those stories to me are so much easier to avoid than these like nitty gritty legal things where it's like, okay, each stair has to be a maximum of 12 inches. Like that's something you have to go in and measure. But like kind of in my mind, and tell me if this is correct, like you should never be giving a builder a huge chunk of money before they've built anything. Like what is a reasonable deposit to put on a house that is not yet built?
In the contractor's law in California, the maximum deposit amount is 10%. So
okay, so there you go.
There you go. I mean, you should not give anyone more than 10%, and then there should be a very solid contract that talks about when you're going to give them money and how much money you're going to give them at each milestone. And a milestone should map out like what's going to happen. The trailer is going to be purchased and the framing is going to be done, and that they have to show you that the trailer was purchased and the framing is done before you make that, like, say, second payment, and that you know in advance how much that second payment is going to be, and you know in advance what the date of that second payment is. And so if they're running late, there's going to be some repercussions, like do you pay them less if they're running late? Or, do they how far in advance do they have to tell you if there's a delay? Like all of that stuff should be in your contract. There should definitely be delay language. So people need to have really solid contracts with their tiny home builders. And in my new book, I think there's 25 different things that need to be in the contract. And just so you know, I mean, I'm not trying to gang up on the builders. I wrote another book for the builders that has this exact same information, so that the buyer, I'm trying to, help the builders as well as the buyers run this business so that nobody gets hurt.
Exactly. I think that I see this as growing pains of the tiny house movement becoming the tiny house industry. And I know that people might not like to hear that because there's a real spirit of DIY and kind of not doing things illegally, but almost, flying under the radar and maybe being a bit of a scofflaw or something. I don't know.
I want to say that what I'm talking about isn't people who are DIYers, and I want to encourage people who are DIYers to just be super creative and do what they want, and they're just building it for themselves. And they still need to follow the codes, but they can be way more creative as someone who is building something for a customer, and they're taking, $75, $80, $100,000 from somebody. They need to be super safe, and they need to have the contract. It's really not the DIYers that I'm addressing here.
Sure. Yeah, and that makes sense. Although if you are doing a DIY build, you'd probably be well served to follow some codes or follow the codes, because A, your house is going to be safer for you, and then B, if you end up selling it, you can, sleep better at night knowing that your house is safe.
100%.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of those things, because you sent me very kindly kind of an advanced copy of the Tiny Home Buyer's Guide. And I said to you before rolling, I'll say it for the show. Like it feels like required reading to me for somebody who's shopping around builders. And in particular, there's a section, I believe it's chapter 4, that really goes through the standards, codes, and regulations.
I love chapter 4 because it's sort of like that TV show, What Not to Wear.
Yeah.
And it has that what not to buy. I went to some tiny home festivals and took pictures of tiny homes that are just illegal. And they're in this festival and they're trying to sell them to people. And I went through Facebook, the tiny home marketplace, and took pictures and screenshots of these tiny homes that people are selling for like $80,000, and they'll have so many illegal and unsafe things in there, and then they'll even describe it as requiring all cash and say that it's been inspected, and it's so misleading. There's no, inspected doesn't mean anything. It has to be certified.
Yeah.
And I just think it's really, there's a lot of words in that book, but when you get to the pictures, and you look at it, and it's all those words start to make sense.
Yeah.
So that was kind of a, like a fun thing to write. And I feel like I kind of just want to write a whole book of just like called like Tiny Home, What Not to Do, and just like have those like big red cross over it. Like the thing has the dog poop, like no dog poop on my lawn, like big, red lines over it. Like don't put windows and curtains over a gas stove.
Yep.
Things like that are just so dangerous. They're against all the codes. And yet someone looks at a tiny house and they see it looks so cute. It's like, oh, look, you can see out the window while you're cooking, but it's very, very unsafe.
Yeah.
So that chapter is really fun.
It is really fun. And I think that if you're willing to share and we can go through them, I think what's really helpful about it, as you just said, is that it's easy for your eyes to glaze over when you read like a long list of bullet points, like lofts must have this, the stairs must not do that. Like my eyes can glaze over, and I like this stuff, but like you kind of wrote this like list. It almost feels like a checklist, a shopping list. And it's kind of like, it's just 11 things, but it's just like, here are the 11 things that you should check that are like, if any of these are off, then the house doesn't meet code, essentially.
The thing about those codes is that a lot of the stuff for the codes is inside of the walls, like how the electrical is built, how the plumbing is built, how the framing is done, how the roof is assembled. And when you buy a tiny house, you can't know if all of those things that are inside of the walls were built correctly. But there are things that you can see. You can see the stairs.
Yeah.
You can see the loft. You can see curtains. You can see fire extinguishers. You can see smoke detectors. So if someone didn't do those really pretty obvious things on the outside, they didn't bother to follow the codes, that's a pretty good sign. They didn't even know there were codes. They didn't bother to follow them on when they did the electrical and the plumbing. It may not be safe to drive it down the road. That's the, that checklist. I love the way you described it, is just to help people know, is it likely that they followed the rules when they built the parts I couldn't see?
Yeah, it's like, I think it was Anthony Bourdain, the chef, who said, you can't always go and look in the kitchen of the restaurant that you're eating at, but if the bathroom is disgusting, don't eat there.
I love Anthony Bourdain. That's a great quote.
Yeah. So, I mean, number one on the list is probably one that most people do know about at this point, which is that there need to be 2 safe ways to get out if there's a fire, meaning that there's a front door and then a second means of egress, like a large window or a second door.
Yeah. I mean, it's not a difficult concept, but things catch on fire or doors break.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been in tiny homes where there's like walls of windows, but every window is only about 8 inches high.
Mm.
So there's like, once you're in there, there's no getting out. Like if something happens to that door, you're dying in there. And so that is a really important, or I've also been in somewhere there's lots of large windows, but they're picture windows, so they don't open,
Right.
which is a
Right.
common thing to do. So there has to be at least one window that is not blocked by furniture. It has to be a certain height off of the ground. It has to, the way that the window opens, it can't be one of those ones that just crank open a little bit. It has to open, the opening has to be large enough to get an adult out of the window.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's the same rule as in the loft too, that there has to be two ways out of the loft, or any area that you're sleeping in.
Right. And that's number 2.
Right. Like if you're sleeping, if say the kitchen downstairs catches on fire and you're in the loft, you need to have some way to get out of there. And I've seen lofts that actually do have sliding windows, but the sliding windows are really low to the ground, so they're behind the mattress.
Right.
And so the window opening does have to be a certain height off of the ground in addition to a certain size.
Got it.
In order to be legal.
Got it.
And I've seen some that are really good that have skylights that open, and then the skylight has like a little patio. It becomes like a little patio. And so like not only is it easy to get out of, but it gives you a sort of little way to jump out of it that seems safer.
Yeah. Yeah, meeting egress in the loft is challenging for sure because, in order to have a window that's big enough, you have to oftentimes you have to lower that loft floor, and then you are encroaching on the headroom under the loft. And so the roof windows are very helpful for that. However, they are also, rather expensive.
And then plus you have to insulate the windows. There's insulation requirements, and it's probably more likely to leak if it's, the rain is hitting it directly versus on the side. So you have to have more building skills.
Do you think that loft, like tiny houses with lofts are going to kind of phase out or become less common because it's so difficult to meet the loft egress requirements?
I don't know.
Or do you think they should?
I mean, if you look at the ANSI code, that the ANSI A119.5, like, which is for park models have had lofts forever.
Okay.
So, and they've been able to build this, so I don't think it will phase out. The way that tiny homes have been building them with the lofts only 2 or 3 feet, you kind of crawl into them, may be phasing out a little bit, where like the lofts and park models are bigger. Like you can almost not stand up, but like maybe at least stand up on your knees in them.
Right. And also a park model doesn't have to be underneath 13.5 feet for towing purposes.
Right. So I think that maybe there's going to be, I don't know what the future is going to hold. That's kind of like a builder question.
Sure. And again, like on the topic of fire, I'm kind of moving down the list, which is, number 3 is smoke alarms in every sleeping area. And number 4 is fire extinguishers.
Yeah. I mean, I think you can buy like
pretty
3 smoke alarms for $25 at the Home Depot or something.
Yeah.
So they're
not expensive.
I mean, it can save your life. There are some regulations about whether smoke detectors have to be wired in.
Yeah.
Or they can just be the battery operated kind. And I think that in different areas, there's different regulations about which type of smoke detector. But I mean, I think that's just under the regular building codes. That's just a building code for any sleeping area in a regular house, a stick-built house too.
Yeah.
So it's not
I mean,
a stretch. Yeah.
I'll add just like, I know this might not be in the code, but personally in my tiny house, because I use propane for various things, I also have a carbon monoxide detector and a propane detector. They're actually, it's one unit that does both. But to me, that's pretty common sense.
Yeah. Wow. That's great. So I didn't even know there was such a thing as a propane detector.
Yeah. Yeah. It can detect propane, natural gas, and carbon monoxide. I mean, it's made by the company Kitty. They make a ton of smoke detectors, and it plugs into the wall. It's got a battery backup, and I mean, I've never been woken up by it.
Well, I mean, that might just make you feel so secure, knowing that, if you're asleep and there's some kind of leak or something catches on fire, that you're going to be woken up alive versus woken up dead.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I actually will say I once had a guest stay in the house who accidentally left the gas burner on but not lit. And when I opened the door, I mean, I smelled the propane right away. So it's not like I needed the alarm, but the alarm was alarming. So it does work.
Well, so you're using your tiny home as an Airbnb now, is that right?
Yeah.
So it's really important that you don't, that you take all those extra safety steps.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, and I had that in there before it was an Airbnb, but.
And then fire extinguishers too.
Yeah.
You put them wherever things are likely to catch on fire, in the kitchen, if you have a wood stove, buy the wood stove.
Yeah.
They're not that expensive. You can buy those little ones that are kind of, tucked away somewhere.
Yeah.
And it's not that hard of a thing to do, but it's definitely, it's so important for safety, and it's one of the code requirements or one of the standard requirements.
Yeah. And I'll just add, for anyone who's listening who's like, yeah, I'll make sure I'll put those things in my tiny house once I have it. No, what we're saying is like, if you're looking at a builder and you're able to look at a tiny house that they've already built, this is a list for you to go through to kind of evaluate, like, are they meeting these requirements? And if they're not, to potentially not work with them.
Exactly. Like, don't buy their tiny house. If they're not following the really easy external codes, chances are they didn't follow, and they didn't even know about all the standards that they were supposed to.
The inside stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah. So the next one is I think another one that is like easy to spot, but also like not often done, which is handrails on the staircase.
I cannot even tell you. Every time I walk into a tiny home and they have these staircases and they've put so much effort into building shelves underneath the staircase to make that space functional.
Yeah.
And they've left the staircase, each step of the staircase looks like you're going to fall off it because the steps are like really big steps. And then there's nothing to grab onto. And all I think about is like kind of come down those stairs in the dark, or, I'm like, when I wake up in the morning, I'm kind of discombobulated. So I don't wake up like perky and paying attention to everything around me. And I just imagine myself every single morning, like taking that first step, the second step, and then, being in my like self falling, like hitting, like that's it. I only make 2 steps before I fall down, and there's no, handrail to hold on to.
Yeah.
I mean, it's the rule. You have to have a handrail. The rule is very specific about how high the handrail has to be. It's not like everyone can make up their own handrail size and height, or they have to think about it. It's already in the standard how it has to be. And why wouldn't you put a handrail on there?
Yeah. I don't know. What about for ladders? Because it's hard to put a handrail on a ladder, although I suppose you can, but then it's not much of a ladder.
Ladders don't need handrails. Because when you think when you're coming up a ladder, like your hands are on the like rung above the one you're standing on, so you have something to hold on to.
Yeah.
But there is in the Appendix Q, there are very specific regulations about ladders. About they have to be at a certain angle. They can't be hanging straight up and down. There has to be a certain angle, the way that they hit the loft and attach to the loft.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't remember what that angle is, but it's not like a direct 90 degrees. They're not hanging up and down. So ladders are regulated.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And builders need to know that. Like you can't just attach a ladder anywhere. It has to be attached to the loft in a certain way. And the loft opening around the ladder can only be the width of the ladder plus 12 inches.
Mm-hmm.
So there can't just be like a giant opening that you slide the ladder back and forth. the ladder has to have a very specific opening.
Got it. Yeah. And okay, that's good to know. And that's, again, like whether you're buying one or DIYing one, you might as well look at these rules and build your ladder to code.
And if you walk into a tiny home and someone's telling you that they built it up to code, and then you see these things wrong, you see that there's like a large loft opening, you see that there's a no handrail, then these guys are liars. And that's just it. Like these people who are selling these tiny homes convince people like, I'm here to save you. I'm here to save the world. I'm such a good person. I want to bring sustainability. I want to bring affordability. Or like that guy in Colorado, like, I'm doing this for God,
Right.
And then they're your best friend. Oh, I won't even pull a credit report on you, which people who are, have bad credit, that's like their dream. Once they hear that, they want to believe everything this person says, and they're liars. So I'm just, every day I see it, it comes over my desk, and I need to just protect buyers, and I need to help builders do better.
Yeah. Yeah.
So is there any other ones that you want to talk about? Or do you want to?
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, if you're willing, I'm kind of just running through it. Because I think it's some things that people probably have never heard, and it's just very practical. Which is that, and there's two of them on the staircase, which is that maximum, like the height of each step can be up to a foot, 12 inches. If you look and you have this great, like, it's like a self quiz section where you can look through the photos and say like, what's wrong? It's like a Where's Waldo or spot the, what's wrong, which is that, these staircases that have huge steps, where you practically have to climb up the last step, especially into the loft, those are illegal, and also super narrow stair treads. Also.
Right. The stair tread has to be, big enough to put your foot on, which the minimum size is 7 inches. And when I see those ones where like every step is a different size, and then the last one is, like 20 inches or something like that, I just think about the fact that these people are just building these things as they go along. Like they didn't plan it. They didn't think, every step needs to be, 8 inches. And build the staircase and then build those shelves underneath it. They built the cubbies and like the stairs were the afterthought.
Yeah.
And it's like they got to the top and it's like, oops, like, oh, look how much room there is there. I guess that will just be like a 20-inch step instead of planning it, which, you can only imagine what's inside the walls if they can't plan, something like a staircase.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a really good point. So, I mean, the last few, we don't have to like belabor them too much. I've lost my place in the document, but it was mainly about so many pages in this book.
I know. The other thing that I like about the book is like on the very last page, there's like the checklist of, all, like I kind of go through the things to think about, like the know thyself section before you buy a tiny home. And then at the very end, it's like, okay, I'm trying to get to it right now too. It's, a checklist of all the things you need to know before you buy something from a tiny home. Oh, that one other thing that reminds me of is that some of these tiny home manufacturers that are shysters, people write really bad reviews for them on Yelp.
Okay.
And that if you are talking to someone and they're telling you they believe in God, they're the greatest people, that they're not going to pull a credit report on you, that they're going to build this thing that's in your budget, even though it seems unlikely, go and read their Yelp reviews, do a search for them in the Better Business Bureau online on Google, and read what people write about them. Ask for their references, ask them to give you information about some of the other people who've bought from them.
Yep.
and get to know them, like do a whole background check.
Yeah.
And that is something that people just you do it before you go to a restaurant, you read their Yelp reviews, but something like your house is even more important. Really do your background research before you
Yeah.
hire these guys or let them build your house, before you give them tens of thousands of dollars.
Yeah.
And the other thing, I do talk a lot in the book about certification.
Yeah, that's what I was about to ask you about is the certification, because it's like if somebody claims that their tiny house is certified and they actually have that like NOAA or Pacific West or RVIA like stamp on what they offer, does that mean that the house is up to code, or do you still have to kind of, it's like a trust but verify kind of thing?
I mean, it should mean that. I recently
Yeah.
have, believe it or not, there's a builder, at least one that I know of, that is in line to NOAA and buying NOAA stickers for one, showing NOAA videos of one place and putting the stickers on a different one.
Ooh,
So,
that's not good.
yeah, it's like when you're just trying to get away with something, when you're that type of person, you're
Yeah.
you're kind of an outlaw. And I mean, it's not like I have anything against outlaws. I mean, who wants to follow all the rules? Nobody. We're Americans. Our
Yeah.
country was built on like not following rules, not doing what the English tell us to do.
Right.
That's like the whole history of our country. That's who we are as Americans. But certification should give you a sense that this is a safe tiny home. And if you have doubts about it, you should still do your background investigation on the builder. And you can
Mhm.
also call the certification companies. And what happens is every certification sticker aligns with a VIN number on the trailer. And so you can call the certification companies or email them and say, hey, I'm buying the certified, here's the trailer, here's the VIN number on the trailer. Did you guys actually certify this one? And double check it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it all comes down to like whether the builder is a trust, you sussing out how trustworthy this company is. And I think that I hope that people don't hear this and feel discouraged, because this is the case for normal contractors and home building as well. Like you still have to do your due diligence and find a trustworthy builder. Just because they, you know, get a stamp from the town or they file the paperwork doesn't mean that they're necessarily going to do the job right. So it's just like, it's kind of common sense, but it's just on a bigger scale because this is a bigger purchase.
Yeah, and especially when you're giving them a chunk of money, like
Yeah.
$40,000 or $70,000 that you're not going to get back. Like if something goes wrong, it is really, really hard to get this money back from these guys. And
Mm-hmm.
you can't just sue them to get it back, because a lawsuit costs, $50 or $100,000 easily. And so
Yeah.
if somebody stole $70,000, are you going to pay like 70,000 more for a lawsuit where you may or may not win? Like, probably not.
Right. Right.
So you really have to do your work in advance before giving anybody any money.
Amen.
Thank you.
You're welcome. So, I mean, what else, like, if we're trying to give people like a primer on, essentially like a buyer beware, how to work with a tiny house builder, how to spot an unsafe tiny house, like what else do people need to know?
Well, they need to know that there are these standards, and that
Yeah.
they should read through what they are and talk to the builder about them and see how the builder reacts to just talking about
Yeah.
the standards. They need to
And when you
know.
say standards, do you mean like ANSI and NFPA
Yes,
essentially?
yes,
Okay.
exactly.
Got it.
Thank you.
Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to make sure to clarify that.
Yeah, great. They need to know that there needs to be a written contract that they have with the builder, and that the contract has to have a lot of different parts in it. It needs to have a warranty so that if something goes wrong, that they know that the builder is going to stand behind it. And the warranty needs to describe, like, how many times the builder is going to fix it. Does it cover the parts and the labor? How long is the warranty? Is it 18 months? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? They need to know what they're buying when they buy it, like what kind of guarantee. I can't tell you the number of tiny home builders there are that build one tiny home and then move to a different state. And then, you're never going to find them again. It's just not happening. So you need to know, like, what kind of recourse you have if something goes wrong.
Yeah.
And they're not, the tiny home builders are not responsible for things like a microwave oven. They're responsible for installing it, but the microwave oven will have its own warranty. And so you have to know that they're going to provide that warranty to you.
Yeah.
And so that you have if the microwave breaks, that you can find, you have a way to go talk to the manufacturer about it. I really believe that it's a good idea to ask for references. And, if this person has never built a tiny home before, it's like, do you want to be their test rat that lives in this? Or do you want to go with a builder who's kind of more solid, and they'll give you a list of happy homeowners that you can call?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I'm saying, you want to get a written contract. You want to know that they're working with a certification company.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, I'm just looking at the list. Talk to previous customers, ask about the warranties, read their Yelp reviews. But maybe before you even choose any builder, I think that it's a good idea to walk through a bunch of tiny homes and just kind of get the feel about, like, what does a solid tiny home feel like? What is one that, like some of them are so cute. Like, there are people out there who are great designers and decorators who can build, like, they're decorated so cute. And I will walk in them and I'll be like, I love this tiny home. It's so cute. Because the decorations are amazing, and the colors and the way they put the throw rugs in. But then once I start looking around at the safety features, I realize this is not up to any kind of codes or standards, and not to get distracted by how cute it is and whether or not it's safe and legal.
Yeah.
There's also figuring out where you're going to put your tiny home, and that, knowing whether you have any place to put it, what the local zoning codes are. And that's what this first book, which is about, like, I call it part 1 for the buyer's guide. There's going to be a part 2 for the buyer's guide, which talks about zoning laws and all the different laws across the United States. And I've been keeping track of them, but the problem with writing a book about the zoning laws is, like, the day I publish it, 3 laws change. So,
right, it's out of date right away.
Yeah, so it's out of date immediately. But I guess I'm going to be publishing this as an ebook, so that, like, I can try to update it, more often.
Right.
But yeah, it is. Those laws are changing all the time. But I'm going to do my best.
Yeah.
To let people at least know at one point in time what are the laws in as many jurisdictions as I know about.
Well, there was one, and then there was one other one in there, in terms of things to look out for, which I thought was interesting, was like companies looking for, like, cash only sales, because of how it's just unenforceable. Once they have your cash, it's kind of like they've got your cash.
Yeah, not only that, but the IRS, like, there's something wrong here, because the IRS frowns on these cash interactions. And so if anybody's taking more than $10,000 in cash, they're supposed to file a form. I think it's 8,300 or 3,800. I'm having a dyslexic moment. But they're supposed to file a form with the IRS where they ask you, where did you get all this cash from? and you
Mm-hmm.
tell them where you got all that money from, and they file it with the IRS. So, which means that they're paying, they have to be paying taxes on all this large cash. I mean, when you go buy a car from a car dealer, you can do the same thing. You can walk in with a chunk of cash, you can pay them cash, they file the form with the IRS, or you can do financing through a bank or credit union
Mm-hmm.
and do it. But there's a lot of paperwork that goes along with that payment. And it's not just this invisible transaction where it's like the money's yours, then the money's theirs. So if you're going to be giving someone a lot of money, make sure that you have a bill of sale that shows that you gave them that money and
Yeah.
that the right tax forms have been filled in, so that just kind of another sign that they're doing things legally.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, Jenifer Levini, I mean, I feel like I could just keep asking you questions all afternoon, but it feels like this is a good stopping point, and I just want to thank you again for being so willing to share and such an advocate for the tiny house industry.
You're welcome. Thank you, Ethan. It's always a pleasure talking to you.
Thank you so much to Jenifer Levini for being a guest on the show. You can find the show notes, including a full transcript and links to Jenifer's books at thetinyhouse.net/236. And also, don't forget to register for the 2022 Tiny House Summit. You can find that at tinyhousesummit.co, tinyhousesummit.co. Jenifer actually gives 2 talks for the summit. Her other one is an introduction to the tiny house legal landscape. You can watch Jenifer's 2 talks along with 28 other incredible sessions for free the weekend of November 4th through 6th at tinyhousesummit.co. You have to register in advance, so head over to tinyhousesummit.co. Well, that's all for this week. I'm your host, Ethan Waldman, and I'll be back next week with another episode of the Tiny House Lifestyle Podcast. Hey, it's Ethan again, and you've made it to the end of the podcast episode. And if you're here, you must truly be a tiny house enthusiast. And so I want to specially invite you to join my free online Tiny House Summit. It's coming up November 4th through 6th, and it features 30 sessions with 30 different tiny house experts that I've kind of handpicked to speak about a number of topics. This event could be life-changing for your tiny house journey, and I want you to be there. So head over to tinyhousesummit.co. Again, that's tinyhousesummit.co to register free for the upcoming Tiny House Summit. All right, I'll see you there.